You're dialed in to Fantasy Jam. Presented by NerdJamTV.com. And now, here's your hosts, Matt Wallen and Billy Taylor.
I'm a saint, I'm a soul. Feel it in my bones, feel it in my bones. I'm a saint, I'm a saint, I'm a soul. Feel it in my bones, feel it in my toes. I'm a saint, I'm a saint, I'm a soul.
All right, everyone, it's that time of year where school is back in session, pumpkin spice lattes are back on the Starbucks menu, and of course, football returns to the television screens. Welcome to this special edition of Fantasy Jam, presented by NerdJamTV.com, where my co-host Billy Taylor and I will take a deep dive approach as we preview the upcoming NFL season. We'll give you some draft strategies, names to remember, players to stay away from, injury updates, and some juicy bargains based on ADP that could potentially help you dominate your fantasy league. Billy and I have played fantasy football for years. I've played in a total of 9 fantasy Super Bowls and have won 6 of them. I've even lost one of those championship games to my co-host Billy Taylor. Now, Billy, you said that you've studied more this year than any other, and I know you. You study every year. Would you say that you're the Mike McCarthy of fantasy football analytics this season?
If I could capture lightning in a bottle and win a championship like McCarthy did, then I'll take that comparison.
Charlie around, he don't work here.
I'd like to probably distance myself from anything that he, especially from watching Hard Knocks. He just kind of seems like a really hard guy to get along with, and not much personality. But of course, we're going to be rooting for the Cowboys this year and hoping he does well. But yeah, I mean, if he spends every day studying, and I think he's got that he's got that reputation, I'll buy that, because I really do kind of at least spend a few 20-30 minutes a day looking into things, mock drafting, studying, trying to learn as much as I can. So it's been, this season, for whatever reason more than others, been a little more addicting and a little bit more motivating each day.
Here's a good idea for a head coach. Why don't you just walk up to your injured starting quarterback who desperately wants to get on the field and mock him for not being able to practice, and then say, "Oh, I'm just busting your balls, champ."
Trust me, nobody wants to be out there more. Hey, I'm busting your balls, champ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then call him champ.
Yeah, he's a real players coach.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing that I've kind of taken away from Hard Knocks, is he doesn't seem to have a great relationship with anybody. But I guess that's not that important, as long as he's making the right calls and putting in the right people in the right places. So we'll see. It'll be an interesting year. The Cowboys roster is the best it's been in a long time. I say that every year, but I really feel that way again, and hopefully he doesn't mess it up, right?
Travis Etienne, out for the season. Basically, that just elevates James Robinson.
You got to move him up into, I'd say, somewhere between 12, 15. He got 90% of the touches just last year because there was kind of a lack of depth there, and a lot of injuries before the season as well. So, you're probably not expecting to see that, but I think he's already proven that he can handle a large workload, and he's great at catching the ball. So I say feel pretty safe, high-end RB2.
Would you take James Robinson over Saquon Barkley, a running back who is currently recovering from an injury? People are on the fence about whether he should be a first rounder, one of the top 5. A lot of people do agree that he should be. However, some people are putting him in the second round. Would you rather have James Robinson over Saquon Barkley?
No, Barkley to me is a generational type talent. So, of course, the injury is something to consider, and it's, kind of slowed his career down a little bit. But plenty of players of his caliber have come back from injuries similar, and I expect that Barkley, I wouldn't be surprised if Barkley returns as a top 5 option there. Ceiling a little higher for me with Barkley. And, I would be willing to take that risk. I mean, of course, everything's relative to ADP. If I could get another running back and get James Robinson in the second round over Barkley, maybe, that would be the consideration. But I think if Barkley fell and it was a situation where they were almost choosing between them, they were both close, I give Barkley the edge in that matchup.
I would agree with you, but my strategy for Saquon is going to be a little different. So I'm not planning on drafting him. I want to stay away from him. I don't want to invest.
Did you pay $40 for him?
No. No, but here's what I would do.
Wow.
So what people are saying is he's going to probably start, have a decreased workload, work his way back. So second half of the season, I expect him to be the Saquon we know and love.
Right.
I'm making him a I'm making him a trade target. I want him to start slow, maybe get like 10 points a few weeks in a row, and then offer some sort of sweet trade, and then hopefully get that RB1 that people drafted him to be. So would I pay 40 for Saquon? Realistically, actually, probably. You know, the value's there, and he, like you said, he's a generational talent. Would I want to do it? Would I feel comfortable doing it? I wouldn't. But considering the fact that you're probably going to have to pay 65 to 70 for somebody like Christian McCaffrey, that's a huge value to get maybe a top 5 running back for $40. Do I think it'll happen? I don't think that would happen, but
Yeah, somebody will spend 58, 60,
Oh, yeah.
61 on Barkley. So
and it might
to
be
me,
you.
well, I don't
seem
know if I
pretty
have
high
him
on him.
targeted. I mean, like I said, I have him right there, right after Zeke. You know, I like Zeke better. I think I've seen in the most recent ADP that Barkley was ahead of Zeke on ADP, so I kind of would go the opposite way there. But yeah, I mean, I'd like him right there in that second tier with Eckler and some of those guys. You know, I think Barkley obviously has some question marks, but enough history and enough talent there to warrant, I think, for me, late first round pick, especially if you're pairing up with another running back. If you go back to back running backs there, Barkley would be a nice like kind of handcuff there at a turn.
Julio Jones returned to practice. That's a big one. They never explained what was wrong with him, which kind of makes you question, but they didn't have to. The Titans are really good at managing their players' injuries. So I think that's another good example of them just taking care of him, doing some precautionary stuff. But it is encouraging that he's returned. Love me some Tannehill this season. I'm sure you do too. And then Darrell Henderson. So he had a thumb injury. Reports early on said that he could miss a couple of weeks. And that leads us into our news segment. Sony Michel got traded to the Rams from the Patriots for a couple of late draft picks. How do you think this is going to impact the Rams?
Very good question. This is, first of all, a situation I don't want to touch, but there could be some value here and there. I think the problem with the situation is it's going to be so unpredictable. 1 week it might be Sony Michel, 1 week it might be Xavier Jones, 1 week it might be Darrell Henderson once he comes back. It doesn't look like either one of these guys is able to take more than 200 touches. They really seem to get injured quite often and are unreliable, and they're out for just a game or two at a time for little things. So it's something maybe you could stream week to week if they're free agents. If you have both of them, maybe you can roll the dice here and there on it. But like I said, for me, it's a situation that's too scary. I like Stafford in the passing game there, so go with that. Ride those waves as much as you need to. Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods.
Did somebody say Cooper Kupp?
Keeper. Those I feel fine with those, and maybe here and there if you can catch someone on a hot streak. But really, Sony Michel just muddies the whole thing. I've seen him ranked higher than Henderson now, especially with the injury. I do have Michel as kind of a bargain bin guy right now because his ADP is so low. I don't know if the community's reacted or the websites have even reacted to his trade. If you're drafting this weekend and they still haven't moved that up, you can actually get him for a pretty good value there. So something to keep in mind. But I would say lower Darrell Henderson around the 35 to 40 range, and then you can move Sony up right there behind him. So kind of depends on who you like. The GM of the Rams said that they like Michel's physicalness and that he kind of adds something new to their running back room. And so that means to me you'll see some goal line touches, but too unpredictable to really ride, but definitely rosterable.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people that were low on Darrell Henderson before the Sony Michel trade,
right?
For a lot of reasons, but I still.
By the way, Cam Akers was on my roster, would have been one of my keepers. So my keeper team definitely felt the brunt of that injury and kind of taken me totally out of that situation. I'm just kind of, like I said, would rather not touch it at this point.
I think pecking order, it's going to be Henderson, Xavier Jones, and then Sony Michel. It's going to take Sony Michel a little time to get caught up. I think they realized that when Darrell Henderson got that thumb injury, they don't have anyone else. They've got a rookie who's completely unproven, who might have some talent, but then it's like a complete drop-off. So I think they brought in Sony Michel as an insurance policy, as a depth play. I do think it's still going to be Darrell Henderson's job with a little mixture of both of those guys, but like you said, it's tough to call.
McVay likes to use different backs in different situations, and it's kind of a theme in a lot of different offenses, so it makes it a little trickier for fantasy.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like a Chris Carson sort of dilemma where Chris Carson doesn't get 20 touches a game. And that's one of the reasons he's incredibly efficient, he's an effective runner, but he doesn't get as much opportunity as a lot of those feature backs. And I think that's going to be the same situation with Darrell Henderson this year. I think he's probably going to get 10 to 15 touches a game. I don't expect him to get more than that. And I think you might see Xavier Jones get like 3 or 4. It's going to be a true running back by committee. It's the same story as last year. And then it took injuries and opportunity to put Cam Akers in that second run of the season, kind of like almost a fantasy MVP kind of situation, So maybe that'll be Xavier Jones this year. Maybe that'll be Sony Michel. But I think we're both in agreement that not a lot's changed because of this trade. It's something to talk about, it's fun news, but not a lot's changed. Real quick, I just want to talk about Damian Harris because he is an enigma. Sure. And I remember talking about him yesterday to you, and I said, I don't know if there are any other running backs with as much of a range of outcomes as Damian Harris. And that the trade has nothing to do with that. I didn't consider Sony Michel somebody that would impact his touches too much. Especially with Ramondre Stevenson. Last year, the Patriots ran the ball third most of any team all season. Here's a fun fact. Defenses stacked the box against him, I believe, more than any other team in the league. It was up there, top 5, if not the most. I'm pretty sure it was the most to stack boxes were against the Patriots last year. They just didn't have any offensive weapons besides Jacoby Myers. I think Damian Harris could be big this year. I think he could be pretty mediocre this year. Do you have any thoughts on Damian Harris? Like, for his ADP, it's a good bargain, don't you think?
So he was on my roster, and when Cam Akers got hurt, it kind of became this decision between Mike Davis and Damian Harris, right? Mike Davis, a little bit higher ADP at 25. Damian Harris is at 30. So, but to me, I felt better about the Damian Harris situation than Mike Davis. It is an unpredictable thing when you're talking about Belichick and how he's going to use his running backs. I think, though, all along they've wanted to maintain, a strong first and second down running game, and Damian Harris kind of represents that. So I feel good about it. He's got the goal line opportunities. Mm-hmm. Of course, James White's going to eat into the reception ceiling there.
Yep.
He's going to definitely be a factor. But, of course, the Patriots are going to want to utilize Damian Harris as kind of that what I think they wanted the role they wanted Michel to fill when they drafted him in the first round out of Georgia. I think that, whenever him and Chubb were at Georgia, they were kind of 1A, 1B. They were both, solid players. And I think that's kind of what they were looking for when they took Michel. And so, of course, Stevenson is the one that benefits from this trade. He'll definitely become more rosterable now that Michel's out of the way. And, of course, because of the preseason he's had, I think, obviously there's not a lot to see this preseason, you know what I mean? I think maybe this next week we'll get a few more clues and nuggets than we have so far. But really, there hasn't been much to see. I mean, the rookie QBs we've seen, but a lot of solid players haven't even touched the field once. So it's kind of been a really not very informative preseason as far as what you're getting to see on the field.
Ramondre Stevenson, he ran for 193 yards and 4 touchdowns and only 25 total carries. Now, keep in mind, they're up against backups, so you have to take preseason with a grain of salt. That's another reason why, it's encouraging. I do think Damian Harris is the guy. Ramondre Stevenson just made Sony Michel expendable.
So just real quick, I don't know, did you see the big touchdown that Ramondre had? And that, so
pretty.
what happened there? What happened there was they took a knee to end the game, and Rivera calls a timeout. I don't know why. He wasn't going to be able to get the ball back. He calls a timeout instead of just letting them run the clock out, maybe just to run another play. They run one more play, and he goes 80 yards for a touchdown. So it almost like that shouldn't have happened, but it did kind of showcase his speed a little bit. But I just think that's those little tidbits in the preseason. Sometimes you look at the stat sheet and realize that that the only reason that even happened is because the coach called this weird timeout to, I don't know, maybe just get one more defensive look, and he got it. Of course he took it 80 yards untouched, but he's obviously looked faster than his build in the preseason, so that's a good sign. So I think they're going to utilize him in the regular season. So
I think so as well, and I believe the only real impact, and we'll mention him a few more times. Hopefully, when we mention him, I can say his name. We'll mention him a few more times. I think in reality, if you get Damian Harris, get Ramondre Stevenson. I think
it's a good handcuff idea to have, especially if the benches are deep and sometimes it's better to have a handcuff than a flyer. So, I think that's a situation you might want to monitor for a couple of weeks and see how it goes. But Damian Harris, ADP-wise, is a good value. I think, I'd say grab him at 30. You're talking about a potential, bell cow style running back that's going to get a majority of the carry. Even if it's 60%, I still think that that's enough for me to want to take a chance on him, especially as like a RB3 or 4.
So let's say somebody watching this is in a traditional, like maybe half point or standard ESPN league, and they're in a redraft snake kind of draft. 5th round, 6th round, where would you take him? Because we know by round 7 he's probably going to get scooped up. I might reach for him.
5th a little high. 6th, 7th, yeah, definitely. I think that's where you start to look at him. Like in our keeper league, he was dropped obviously because I did not go. I ended up making a trade, picking up Kareem Hunt and dropped Damian Harris and Mike Davis. So I think I see him going in maybe like the 2nd round of our keeper league, which is about the 7th or 8th. But sometimes the talent's pushed down in those keeper leagues because teams might not have a full 6 to keep. So, like I said, running back 3 or 4, I'd be comfortable with that with Damian Harris.
Absolutely. All right. One last piece of news. This is a pretty big one. So speaking of keepers, I almost kept Drew Lock because I was like, surely he's going to win out over Teddy Bridgewater. He had more flashes, and I really followed that news. And yesterday, I believe it was, or was it earlier today? I
think it was yesterday, yeah.
Teddy Bridgewater was named the starter. So it was like out of nowhere, Teddy Bridgewater was named the starter, and I was like, well, thankfully I didn't keep Drew Lock. I think I had like a few hours to make that decision, so I could have.
Right.
Yeah, but it was like, do I keep him? There are a couple on my roster. It's a 2 QB league. I thought about maybe keeping Jameis, and I was like, I don't know,
So both tough, yeah. And they haven't named the starter there yet, so that does make that situation tougher. I was totally surprised by this. I thought Drew Lock played better in the preseason. I've always believed in Drew Lock. I think he can make throws that Teddy Bridgewater couldn't make playing Madden. But there must be more behind the scenes there. I think one of the things is that, Vic Fangio hasn't won a game in September.
He hasn't. I heard that today. Yep.
And so I believe that is a motivation to kind of get the guy in there that had the 5th highest completion percentage last year, because that he's going to not make as many mistakes and take as many chances. And then maybe later on down the road, you make the switch to Drew Lock, you get a more aggressive guy in there, and it's going to give defenses problems because they're not going to be able to adjust as quickly, especially if they've been game planning and all the film they have on Teddy Bridgewater. But, definitely something behind the scenes that, the casual fan probably not aware of that really solidified the job for Teddy Bridgewater. I know he's a player favorite kind of guy, coach's favorite kind of guy. Everybody loves him. I don't know what Drew Lock's like, but, I'd like to think, that does play a little bit of a factor sometimes in those kinds of decisions. Bridgewater's a little bit more of a veteran. So it'll be interesting to see. Doesn't change a whole lot for me. Sutton, Judy, Gordon, Fant. I feel pretty similar about them. Bridgewater, I think their chances of making a deeper run a football team, kind of those chances to me aren't as great with Locke. I just feel like Locke can do more things. But we'll see kind of how that unfolds. The Broncos have a great roster, so if Bridgewater keeps things under control and doesn't make a lot of mistakes, they'll probably play winning football, and I'm sure they'd like to win a game in the first 4 weeks this year.
Yeah, I would think so. If they don't, something's horribly wrong with that organization.
The eye test, Locke was good. He's playing really good. I don't know. His thing's always been consistency. So, maybe that was the deciding factor. But, you're seeing this across the league right now with coaches being a little more conservative with their week 1 starter, with Dalton, with Garoppolo, with, other guys that, maybe don't give them the best chance long term, or maybe don't have the high ceiling dynamic capabilities, but are a little bit more savvy, a little bit more ready to read NFL defenses, and maybe puts them in a better chance to at least get off on the right foot and get things going. Because in this league, if you start out 0-2, 0-3, it really can change the trajectory of your entire season. So, and maybe that's the thinking there.
Well, he's, like you said, got a lot of weapons. One of those weapons is Jerry Jeudy, a guy who a lot of people thought last year was the best wide receiver coming out of college. You've got a segment called My Guys, and Jerry Jeudy is one of your 3 My Guys. Why is that?
So I just think based on his ADP, you're buying a lottery ticket real cheap here. I think that if he makes the kind of ascension, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, some of these other guys that came out at the same time as him, he'd be a solid wide receiver 2, potential wide receiver 1. And ADP is 31 at wide receiver, 84 overall. Get him at a pretty decent value. He wasn't kept in the keeper league. He's going to be available for someone to redraft. And I think, just the potential that he has, especially adding him as a 3rd receiver, is immense. He had 52 catches and 856 yards last year. The best bet is that that's going to go up. I mean, what are the chances he doesn't meet those numbers, right? I say 1,000 yards, I think, is just, a really conservative floor for him. I would not, obviously wouldn't be much of a shock to anyone if he gets 1,000 yards. I did hear recently about this hit rate for second-year receivers. That's something that every fantasy manager should pay attention to. It's like 86% of wide receivers in their second year outperform their ADP. So you're talking about a hit rate of like over 75%, and it's like anyone you can think of has come out in the last 10 years, with the exception of just a few guys that have gotten hurt, like Corey Davis and other guys that have had a good rookie year but have gotten hurt or had something happen. For the most part, our second-year receivers always outperform their rookie year. And so I think, Judy's a prime candidate for positive regression there. There were some red flags. He only had a 46% catch rate, and he dropped 12 passes. So those are numbers that, are kind of alarming. But I think with the return of Sutton, they have an easy schedule, 7th best schedule against receivers. We broke down a play last year, Jerry Jeudy, you might remember, where he faked the flag route and then turned it into a touchdown. And if you can get on the same page with Teddy Bridgewater on some of those things, Jerry Jeudy's an excellent route runner. He could produce big results at wide receiver 31. I just think there's a lot of guys going before him that don't have the same type of potential.
There was a pretty good rookie last year in Justin Jefferson.
All right.
And there's a good quarterback that's throwing to him who might have made your My Guys list.
This one's a little bit of a, I guess maybe controversial. I'm not sure. Kirk Cousins is one of those guys that, I think some people will appreciate him. A lot of people don't like him and don't think he's fantasy worthy. He's going as the 20th quarterback. To me, he's, that's absolutely free. If you're playing a strategy where you load up on receivers, running backs, and tight ends early, and your whole strategy is to get the best value quarterback at the end of the draft, to me, Kirk Cousins represents that. He had a career best 35 touchdowns last year. He threw for 4,200 yards. The weapons around him are awesome. Jefferson, Thielen, Cook, Irv Smith. Those are all players that can do a lot with the ball.
Love me some Irv Smith.
I just think that, Kirk Cousins is kind of coming into a point in his career where he's very reliable. He's only missed one game in his entire career. And, I don't think you see that at the end of the draft. A lot of the dart throws at the end of the draft are like Cam Newton, Ben Roethlisberger, Matt Ryan. To me, I feel like Kirk Cousins is a little bit of a better bet there, especially because nobody is really, if you're in a 10-man league, one quarterback league, he's going to be totally free. Even people have backups, ahead of him. And guys like Trevor Lawrence are getting drafted ahead of him. To me, that's you're playing more of the potential than the actual results. Kirk Cousins is going to have a better statistical season than Trevor Lawrence. I mean, of course, Trevor Lawrence has this huge ceiling and could be, a generational type of guy. But, the smart money would be that, a guy like Kirk Cousins is going to throw for more yards, throw for more touchdowns. So to me, I feel like he's a great value there. I guess the big negative, of course, with him throughout the whole offseason is he's very outspoken against the NFL's policy as far as requiring players to vaccinate. He's caught a lot of heat from the media, a lot of heat from the coaches, and he actually just returned from the COVID list because they had a close contact case. And I'm not sure if you know the policy on that. If you have a close contact, you have to be out. I think it's 4 or 5 days.
I think it's 5.
So that could potentially something that could come up later in the season, right?
I think the vaccination decision is a very private health matter for me.
And there's other players that don't have that kind of like looming over them because if you're vaccinated, of course, even if you have a close contact, you can still play. So that was one thing I think maybe, it's something to consider. Maybe that's why his ADP's dropped. And I think, just in general, people kind of are turned off by that. So
vaccinated. Should be vaccinated. Everyone. They're earning millions of dollars.
But I do feel like, if you're playing that strategy where you're not trying to get one of the top 5, 6 guys, this Kirk Cousins is one of those guys that's going to outperform his ADP. He was quarterback 13 last year, so he should be, I'd say, right about the same this year.
Yeah, and they don't really have a great slot receiver. They've got Osborne and they've got D.D. Westbrook. But you kind of don't need a good slot receiver when you got Thielen and Justin Jefferson and Irv Smith, who I really love, and a running game that's, I would say, pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good. I will say Justin Jefferson might be one of those 14% that doesn't outperform his ADP in his second year just because his rookie year was so awesome. I mean, it was one of the best rookie years of all time. So I believe it's the rookie record for yards. So, obviously, if you're paying for him, you're hoping that he repeats what he did last year. That could be tough. But I think in general, CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Higgins, these guys that are going to their second year, it's a good bet that they're going to outperform where they're drafted.
Love me some second-year wideouts. Who else do you have? You got one more name on your list.
One more is a running back, Devin Singletary. I feel like this guy is just totally underrated. I don't know if I'm seeing things different from other people. I talked a lot about him last year. ADP is 40 for running back, 105 overall. You're talking about running back 5 or 6, your last guy on your bench. To me, I think that's worth the dice roll for him. He's got a 4.8 yard per carry in his career. That's almost Jamal Charles level, right? That's 4.8 is a huge number. He catches the ball. He's got 38 receptions last year, 50 targets. He's obviously limited because of how they use him, how Josh Allen kind of dominates touches there. We talked about that before, how when you have a running quarterback, it really does limit the ceiling there. But to me, Devin Singletary
taking the goal line work.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got that to deal with too. But I think Singletary, he's got that home run hitter ability, and he's looked great in the preseason. I mean, Devin Singletary has definitely looked better than he did last year. I think, you can give him 1 year. He had one down year. Obviously, that's going to scare a lot of people off this year. Roll the dice on Devin Singletary towards the end of your draft as your 5th or 6th running back. There's not a lot of risk there. He has a potential to pay off huge in my mind.
Real quick, Devin Singletary or Saquon Barkley? Okay, Saquon. We're not going to get too controversial. Well, that's a good list of your guys. I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's more about value, ADP. Like Devin Singletary, we don't expect to be like an RB1,
right.
But he's a guy who has that potential, especially if Zach Moss goes down. We like the talent from both of those running backs. Zach Moss was a guy we talked about all season, where it was like,
see, and Zach Moss is getting drafted ahead of Singletary, so I think that's fair. But I think if you're looking for the better value, Singletary represents that.
Absolutely, and I don't even know who their third string running back is. I would assume if something happened to Zach Moss, it's going to be the Devin Singletary show, which would be a lot of fun in that offense. All right, so you mentioned Kirk Cousins has missed one career game. I just want to talk for a second. We don't want to get too deep into the top running backs. It's very subjective for the most part. There are 2 running backs that have missed one game their entire career due to injury. One of those is Derrick Henry, and the other one is Ezekiel Elliott. So Derrick Henry, this is fun because Derrick Henry has no handcuff. So you're really riding the fact that he stays healthy, even with all those carries that he's accumulated over the years. You would think he's lost some of the tread on his tires. Would you consider Derrick Henry a safe bet, like a top 5 guy for sure? Or the workload that he's inherited over the years, does that kind of scare you off any?
I know it's something to consider. It's a lot of carries, you know what I mean? But this guy is built different. I mean, he is a tank, and I don't think you can compare him to anybody else. So, put him in the category with like Earl Campbell and, Walter Payton. And other than that, it's like not a lot that you can really kind of look back to say, like, what would a guy do with this many carries over 5, 6, 7 years? He's got a couple years left in my mind. Ride Derrick Henry like the steam train he is. For the next couple of years. I mean, yeah, eventually he's probably going to break down. It might be quick, it might happen really, really suddenly, but I don't think there's enough there to scare me away from Derrick Henry. I mean, he was, at times just unstoppable last year, and I'm sure he's going to do that a few times this year.
What makes that stiff arm so devastating?
What makes it so devastating is you're getting stiff armed by a 6'10" running back. That's what's so devastating about it.
He does have those dud games, that every running back can have, but, he's not any different. So, you're going to see sometimes he has that low floor where if the game doesn't go their way, he obviously isn't involved in the passing game. So if game script goes against him and they're going to pass a lot, that's the potential he has to not have a good game. Otherwise, if they're getting him 20, 25 carries, it's a pretty good bet that Henry is going to score a touchdown, run a few people over. And he's just fun to watch. So I think, I'm not too scared of Derrick Henry yet. I think maybe it's something to start thinking about, especially if you're in a keeper situation. But I'd say totally green light this year. I actually have him rated as the 3rd best running back. For some reason, a lot of people dropping him, closer to the season. I've seen his ADP drop, and I don't think there's anyone. It's really Cook, McCaffrey, and Henry to me as the 3 best available running backs.
Well, I just said we're not going to get controversial. I'm going to get controversial for a second.
Let's hear it.
I would say Derrick Henry, non-PPR, number 1 overall.
Yeah, I mean,
not a lot of people
PPR,
would say that. Non-PPR,
it's a good. I mean, because that's where McCaffrey's value. He puts so much value right there. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd say Cook or Henry would definitely maybe catapult. Just because Henry's potential to just get those goal line touchdowns. I mean, and he's got a 99-yard touchdown run too. So he can kind of do it all as far as with the ball in his hand. So, and he's underrated as a pass catcher. They just don't use him as often in that role because I don't think they need to. But it's not like he can't. He's caught a few screen passes and taken them to the house. So,
and I hear he's been working on his pass catching skills, even though he's like already fine.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've heard word on the street is that he's
Tannehill season.
Yeah, improved quarterback play. That's important.
And Tannehill could be a top 5 quarterback.
I mean, love me some Tannehill.
He's got everything lined up for him to really explode this year. I mean, it's really tough to take that last step and become one of the elite guys, but he has got every foundational piece laid in front of him to do that. He might be like, Tom Brady went 10th overall in 2007 as far as quarterbacks. He was like the 10th, 11th quarterback drafted in 2007. I'm not saying he's going to have a 50 touchdown season like that, but that was kind of the same situation where Brady had kind of built building blocks to be able to explode in that way, had all these weapons around him. They added Randy Moss in free agency, and so it was kind of like a lot of similar things to Tannehill this year. I mean, very similar game. Like I said, I'm not going to sit here and predict 50 touchdowns, but I wouldn't be totally shocked if Tannehill ascends up into the next tier of fantasy quarterbacks.
Well, and you think having Julio Jones would only help him. Not to say he didn't have good pass catchers last season. He had great pass catchers last season, but I do expect a little bit of a boost having Julio Jones around. And of course, when you have a running game like what you have with Derrick Henry, it's just going to open the door. Derrick Henry, maybe when you look at the health, when you look at the fact that he's only missed one game his entire career, seems pretty safe. The main argument I would say against drafting him so early is there's not really a backup that you can handcuff to. With
Darnarrington Evans is listed as the backup, but is he going to get more than one carry a game? You know, it'd have to take. Yeah, I mean, there's just really no telling. Yeah.
And I'd rather have a Chuba Hubbard. I'd rather have an Alexander Madison.
Right.
I'd rather have a Tony Pollard. You know. So speaking of Tony Pollard, man, I'm nailing these segues today. So speaking of Tony Pollard, so Zeke, and I've got a stat I'm going to throw out. You have to take it with a grain of salt because I think having Dak in would probably skew these numbers a little bit. But Zeke had 12 carries from the 1 yard line or less last season. He only got in 5 times. So you would expect, instead of touchdown regression, some touchdown progression this season. You'd probably do better with an offensive line. Now, of course, with Dak in, you would expect more QB sneaks. You would expect more scrambles. So you got to take that with a grain of salt. But I do think that Zeke will probably get 10 touchdowns this season, and I think he deserves to be in the top 5 conversation. I would take him over Saquon Barkley, Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, all those other guys that are right there in the like top 10 of running backs, maybe not top 10 overall picks. Anything you're worried about with Zeke?
No, I put him back where you had him before last year. You got to kind of wash last year out, and it really doesn't. Nothing's going to be the same as it was last year, unless Dak gets hurt again, obviously. But obviously, without Dak, it's a totally different system, totally different game plan, different Zeke. And Hard Knocks has shown that Zeke's motivated. He's ready to go. He's in shape. He's lost some weight. Gained some strength, and they're not touching him in the preseason, so he's going to be ready to go. So to me, totally green light on Zeke. Obviously, unless you're taking Cook, Henry, McCaffrey, I wouldn't. Zeke at 4 is perfectly fine to me. So I wouldn't hold back at all. I think Zeke's going to be one of those guys. He just returned to what he was. If you liked him before, I would expect to see exactly what we saw between 2016 2019.
Yeah, and
which is number 1 or 2 running back. He really, he was elite. So if you can get a guy like that at 4 or 5, and then get a wide receiver or something in the second round to pair him with, that's a nice combo.
A lot of people forget about this. Zeke had COVID last offseason. First off, there wasn't an offseason. There was no preseason. He was sick for part of that with COVID, and we saw players who got stricken with COVID. They weren't as good as we expected them to be, where there was a huge drop-off. Myles Garrett is a great example of a player who was lights out, caught COVID, came back, but was not the same player. So you have to wonder if that impacted him, at least coming into the season. Everyone said he was maybe a little slower, maybe a little overweight. I don't know if COVID had anything to do with it. But yeah, I think we're going to see probably one of the best years that Zeke's ever had, and he's had some pretty good years. The offensive line is healthy again. Dak will be back. Amazing offensive weapons. Zeke is not going to be facing stacked boxes. Back before the Amari Cooper days, Zeke saw a lot of stacked boxes. He was still a productive running back. And even when Amari came onto the scene, I would still say that people were more worried about Zeke than anything else in that offense. So, I think it's a bounce back year for Zeke. I think it's a no-brainer. I would put him possibly. We're homers, so I would draft him over a Derrick Henry. I would draft him over maybe a Dalvin Cook, probably not a Christian McCaffrey, but I love me some Zeke, and I think we're all going to eat if we draft him this year. Zeke over Saquon Barkley. It's my last time a man asking this question.
I said that one earlier. I go Zeke. Yeah, that's.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about a lot of players coming up. I want to talk about Zach Wilson, Corey Davis, Michael Carter. Why are we talking about the Jets? I don't know, but we're going to talk about them. Elijah Moore. We've got a lot of great show left. Let's take a little break. We'll come back here in a moment, and we'll see you guys here in just a moment for more of the Fantasy Jam 2021 Draft Preview.